Hello, Montana. Hello, academic WorldQuesters, and hello, world. Chris Hislop here from the Montana World Affairs Council. This is Connect Montana, where we bring the world to Montana and Montana to the world. For the past 16 years, the Montana World Affairs Council has hosted the Academic WorldQuest. This is a 3-day educational conference held in the spring at the University of Montana here in Missoula, where we bring hundreds of the best and the brightest high school students from across Montana to discuss key international issues and engage with experts like authors, ambassadors, and others. The conference is capped off by a knowledge competition where teams from around the state vie to represent Montana in the national competition that's held in Washington, D.C. every year. But this year, we'll be having the Academic WorldQuest virtually, as will be the national competition. So in order to help our students prepare for the knowledge competition, we're going to have a series of Connect Montana webcasts that look at the topics that they will be tested on. And tonight's topic is looking at the Arab Spring 10 years later. So I'd like to welcome our first guest, Dr. Sammy Rashwan. Dr. Rashwan is a physician who was born in Egypt, where he received his medical degree. As a student, he valued traveling abroad to further his education and to get more experience of different cultures. Dr. Rashwan completed his clinical training of critical care at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and earned his degree of medical management from Carnegie Mellon University. Dr. Rashwan has served as National Health Director of a health management company specialized in starting up healthcare services in hospitals across the United States and abroad. In addition to managing stressed up operations, born, raised, and having worked in the Middle East, as well as recent work experience in this area, he possesses a great deal of knowledge and firsthand experience of the Arab culture. I'd also like to thank our very generous sponsors, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Allegiance, and Stockman Bank. Dr. Rashwan, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. How are you?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. It's really, I'm pleased and honored to be part of this event.
Well, we couldn't be luckier to have somebody with your background and your knowledge on this. Now, let me just maybe start off by saying 10 years ago, we saw a series of anti-government protests, uprising, and some were armed rebellions that spread across parts or much of the Arab world. Now, you have some particular experience with this. I wonder if you could tell our audience a little bit more about the very particular set of circumstances that led up to these uprisings and the revolution which took place in Tunisia, and then later it spreads to Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Bahrain, and Syria. Also, it would be interesting to hear from you on the role of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the West in the Arab Spring and these uprisings. And then finally, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about where we are now. We're 10 years later, particularly with your experience in Egypt. Not all changes have been positive, have they? So we'd love to hear a little bit of your perspective and your experience. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. And again, I'm pleased and honored to be part of this event, which is touching on a very important historical events in the whole region, which is somehow the Middle East has been a center of interest of so many areas and so many powers for so many different reasons. While it is because of the geographic significance or because of the wealth of resources, oil and other, or the location and so on and so forth. I will start with just some historical facts. The Middle East is really well-known autocratic dictatorship. It actually split between monarchs and brutal military dictatorships, fascism in a way. So if we start from east to west, from Saddam Hussein to Hafiz Assad, the father of Bashar al-Assad, to Lebanon, to Nasser in Egypt, Bashir in Sudan, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, Bouteflika in Algeria, and Zain Abidine Dali in Tunisia, all of those came to power through military coups. And the rest are monarchs, starting from the west to the east, Morocco, you have Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Kuwait, and the others. All of those are monarchs. The Arab rulers in those areas, they focus too much on how to keep power and how to maintain it within their own family for monarchs and their own institutions for the military part. The armies in those countries, what is interesting is to protect the rulers from the people, not to protect the country from outsiders or enemies. So if we'll start where the uprising started, where it was in Tunisia, widespread poverty, corruption, only elites can actually survive in a decent way. A college grad who didn't have enough connections to find a decent job. So to provide for his family, got like a street cart as a street merchant. So buy few things and sell them in the middle of the street to make ends meet. Obviously, that will not guarantee any decent living. However, just to keep them like eating and just keep the wolf out of the door, if you would. So a female police woman, and you have also to take that in the context of those countries in general, the area in general, including every state, even in Israel, very kind of chauvinistic in a way. Okay, so they have the male rule is higher. The male figure is higher. Okay, so she slaps him on the face. Also, slap on the face in that area means more humiliation and disrespect than it is here or in the West or other cultures. So it's just in that context. And spills over all of his cart, turn it over on the street. So he couldn't take that kind of humiliation and it's just bad treatment for very legitimate reason of trying to make a living to provide for his family. So he set himself on fire. He died, burned out. And that was the spark which started in Tunisia. And in Tunisia, Ben Ali was the president of Tunisia, who also came through a coup. After a few days, he fled to Saudi Arabia, which given him refuge. And then it started the uprising there. And it started to spread Libya, Egypt, Sudan, Yemen, Bahrain, Syria, others. Okay. In Egypt, Mubarak was the president of Egypt at that time. And it was planned for his successor to be his son. And that's perfectly fine in Egypt for them. However, his son was not a military background. His son was a civilian. So the army was not happy with that. And that's why when the uprising happened in Egypt, the army didn't quash it like they did in Syria, for instance. They let it go to get rid of Mubarak's plans of getting his son to inherit the presidency, which is interesting inheritance of the presidency, and to move on to a military person. So they let it go. And by that time, the Muslim Brotherhood was the most organized, disciplined organization at that time. Most of them, the vast majority of them, are highly educated, lawyers, engineers, professors, doctors, and so on and so forth. So they swept the elections. Egypt had in that year, which is 2011, there was no roof of freedom of speech. And then the first ever democratic elected president was President Morsi. okay? And then they swept the parliament and they swept the house and everything else was under. So at that point, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and some Western countries, we'll get to that in a minute, okay, just got unnerved. Why? Because if it will not stop in Egypt, Egypt, the most populous and the most kind of historically, it is the leader of that area. I'm not talking about financially, but it's the leader intellectually and everything else. They are actually the ones who taught all of those countries everything, medicine, engineering, everything, built up those countries in a way. So they started playing against Egypt. They made it extremely difficult for the Muslim Brotherhood to actually govern. Okay, throwing like, just obstacles one after the other, made life miserable. And then poured tens of billions of dollars on very targeted media to target the problems and just to make things very difficult. During that time, when Egypt asked for some little aid because everything was on hold, so the economy was struggling, the IMF, okay, which was controlled exclusively by the Western powers, refused to give it even $100 million. After, okay, all of those problems started the regular Egyptian between the systematic propaganda on the media. All of the media hosts in Egypt will go to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to get the instructions and go back to say what they need to say, and then started things to get very kind of upside down until that first year ended, and then the military coup came in. And after that, the leader of the military coup appointed a president, and they changed it. They passed like hundreds of laws over a few days to prepare for that person who is a military person to be the president, and they changed everything to a lot worse than what it was before Mubarak. Mubarak had some intelligence and had some, he was a little bit smart, and he given some sort an edge of freedom of speech, which is completely taken afterwards. What is interesting after that, including the tens of billions of dollars from the Gulf area, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates in particular, okay, the IMF actually approved tens of billions of dollars as aid to Egypt all of a sudden. Okay, all right. So during that time, that 1 year, the powers to be, which are the justice, the judiciary system, the police, the army, the media, and the businessmen colluded together to quell that uprising. And one of the major reasons of that uprising in Egypt was the police brutality. The police in Egypt is very brutal, okay? It is not, they don't treat you with respect except if you are somebody or have connections. Then they kept throwing obstacles until that was completely quelled, to the point that the president, the only elected president in history of Egypt, democratically elected president, was actually imprisoned, stayed for 4 years in a solitary cell until he died out of neglect. And they say some other things, but I cannot prove it. But some would say that they given him poison, whatever. But nobody really cared out of Egypt. But those who cared in Egypt, they didn't have the power to really ask questions or any of that. So the Supreme Court during that year, who was actually all loyalists to Mubarak, once, and there was parliament elections, which tens of millions voted, just with one line, they canceled the elections and they called it void and nil and sent the whole country in turmoil, okay? And more problems to come. So just a few days ago, the parliament in Egypt, who ran on a message of their slogan was, we are running for the parliament to say yes for anything the president will ask for. Okay, and then parliament passed a law to fire any employee who is portrayed as a not pro-government. Okay, and then during that time, the West truly really kind of just kept turned their face, kept a blind eye to what is happening in Egypt. Egypt has built tens of mega prisons and added a lot of more taxes. The poor gets more poor and the rich gets more rich, and the dichotomy is actually spreading way ahead. Now they just elected also a House of Representatives. It's 300. 100 is directly appointed by the president. Another 100 of their loyalists, the most loyalist party, and the other 100, the third 100, is actually from those who are very pro-regime. So you really have no chance between the judicial system to the police. There is no what is called rule of law in those areas. Okay, whether it is Saudi Arabia or in Egypt or in the United Arab Emirates, none of those actually have this kind of rule of law. So to the point that it is a common saying right now, I see it a lot on the internet and the social media, that they started in that area and some other Muslim countries to call the axis of evil is Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, because right now they are standing against anything which will give the power to people. Anywhere else in that area, those are the three who will jump. He did that in Libya, he did that in Sudan, and other places. So winners and losers 10 years after the revolution. There is a little bit of silver lining. Tunisia is on democratic course after ridding themselves from a dictator, democratically elected president. Algeria on a smooth course, at least there is no civil war or anything, and they elected a president democratically. I don't know if he's a very good or not. However, that was a democratic transition. Morocco has significant changes and made significant concessions, although he is a king, but he made significant concessions. Yemen succumbed, unfortunately, to a civil war because of the interference between Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, backed by the United States of America, okay? And Egypt is rid themselves of a dictator, came another dictator. He's 100 times more brutal and the dictator than he is, and there's really no even slim margin of freedom of speech. United Arab Emirates and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are spending all of their time and most of their money on quelling anything which will give some sort of freedom to the people of those countries. And Syria, as everybody knows, in a civil war because of the interference of Russia and other countries, and because the president just elected to turn it into a civil war instead. Just last thing before I conclude. The father of the sitting Bashar al-Assad, he is Hafiz al-Assad, in 1982, when there was an uprising in Hama, which is not a very big city, and he killed in 1 week tens of thousands of residents of that uprising. Every single one of those who I mentioned had committed massacres against their own people. So with this, I will conclude and I will open for any questions.
Dr. Rashwan, thank you very much for that insight. I mean, it's an excellent perspective from your own experience with the Arab Spring. Now, I just want to remind our participants and the viewers here that you are welcome to chat in questions using the chat box to Dr. Rashwan if you have anything from his comments or otherwise. But let me kick off, Dr. Rashwan. In all of this, one thing that I didn't hear a lot of was the word democracy. So 10 years ago, when the Arab Spring, and even in the Western news, at least, even the use of the term spring suggests a renewal, or, you know, something is growing and somehow it's seen as positive. There was a lot of talk about democratization, or the opportunity for democracy to take root in these states that, as you said, had long time been monarchies or had been controlled by military rulers. So now, not so much at the time, but maybe if you could take us into today, what do you see in terms of democracy, and do you see any promise for more or less democracy in these countries? Over to you.
Thank you very much for this excellent question, because that is also an extremely important point. So let us put a big statement, which is very factual. It is substantiated and proven every single day. The West keeps, and here the West, because we look up to the West, in those areas and call them freedom and pro-democracy and all of this. They keep talking about democracy and they are supporters of democracy. However, under the table, they are against it 100%. When something happened in Algeria and they elected a government, which unfortunately was pro-Islamist, okay, France sent their military prowess, and they killed it, and tens of thousands of people were killed. Actually, hundreds of thousands were killed. So on the surface, they say they support that, but under the surface, actually, they are way against it. So let us put it this way. They want a puppet in those areas, give them one order and play by our books. If not, we could topple you at any time. To the point that our own president here, which I'm not proud of that, when he calls my favorite dictator to somebody who is dictator, so my favorite dictator, okay, that's number one. Number two, he protected a crown prince of Saudi Arabia who chopped off a very decent, soft-spoken critic of very little things. They chopped him with a chainsaw in their own council, okay, alive. And of course, they lied about it early on, but he protected him from any kind of, say, international prosecution or international court or something like that. So with that, I'm really not hopeful at all of real democracy. You couldn't call it democracy, you could call it XYZ, but the real word as democracy, I don't see that's happening in that area, at least for now. Especially in Egypt. Forget it in Egypt.
Right. But Dr. Rashwan, let me pick up on something also you said very early on in your remarks. You mentioned poverty. And that's another story here, not only in this part of the world, but around the world regarding, where we see poverty. We may see also a very educated society, but there may not be a lot of opportunity. And certainly we've heard that about the Arab world, whereby there is a significant poverty, but those who may have gone through university or have become educated don't have the opportunities that they would like and that we may see in other parts of the world. Now, can you also bring us up to date now, 10 years later in these same countries? What do you see and what can you tell us about poverty and opportunity for people?
In Egypt, it is huge dichotomy with a very deep chasm, abyss between most of the people and the elites. So tons of billionaires, many of them actually. Egypt is not a poor country, but in Egypt and then in that area as a whole, it is who you know. It's not who you are or what you do. So if you are on F in your class, just the very bottom of your class, and you have connections, you will be actually hired as, at the very prestigious top, positions. And if you are, and it was actually said on the TV, which was very sad, that if you are in the top of your class, but you are coming from a poor family, not having the connection, stuff like this, no, it is not good for them to actually be hired at those kind of jobs. They say, okay, there will be really some psychological problems with those people coming from somebody who is the son of, say, a housekeeper, but he's the top of his class. He is the genius. But no, he should really also seek something close to what his father was doing. So again, if we are on this kind of route, what I see back in Egypt right now is either those who are very connected to the regime and those are well connected, advanced, fast, much more than they earn, and others who just fend for the life day in and day. So until you will change that kind of makeup of that kind of persona and personality and this culture, I don't see any real change in even in like universities, College of Medicine, College of Engineering. If your father is one of them, like professor
Right.
there, the chances are, even if you are F throughout the year, you will be one of the tops, and you will come as a professor someday if you are the best, but you are the son of the carpenter, or the son of the one who's the housekeeper, or those who are not really as high class, social class as them, then you just probably just, take your pick. Either you work on a cart on the street, or just kind of sterilize some equipments in one of the clinics.
I see. So, Dr. Rashwan, I think we have time for one question that's just come in from one of our participants. A question: do the political problems have to do with the religious beliefs in the region?
I am very glad also you asked that question, because actually I had it a note here. What is interesting in Egypt is that, and that was, by the way, discovered accidentally during that 1 year when there was raids of some of the police headquarters. The police in Egypt, the state itself, was actually fanning the religious and racial divisions to be able to control the people. Okay, so to the point that there was a big explosion in one of the churches in Alexandria. Alexandria Church is one of the oldest churches and is very respected church. Actually, the state police was behind that explosion. It wasn't known until it was discovered by a chance. And by the way, before they discovered that, they already told that some of the other Muslims, they were behind that, and they executed them already. So the state used those kind of racial and religious divisions to flame them more, to be able to control. So it is very simple. If this area here, there's some like social kind of, some people are talking about politics, they have rights to be voting, blah, blah, blah. Okay, one explosion in a mosque, one explosion in a church, a Muslim kills a Christian, Christians kills a Muslim, it's in, so they pick up everybody, and that will be the end of this story. So they used it all the time, starting from Nasser, by the way, continued throughout the day.
Well, it's the end of that story, but certainly not the end of the story for the Arab Spring, where things continue to unfold across the Arab world. It's very important that we hear from people like you, Dr. Rashwan, to give us some deeper understanding of the dynamics that's going on there. So I want to thank you so much for your remarks, your very thoughtful answers to our questions. Let me just also thank all of the participants tonight. And then those Montana students who may be watching tonight or are watching the recording, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to do a series of these talks touching on the topics for academic WorldQuest to help you prepare for the knowledge competition in March. So thank you also for joining the academic WorldQuest. Finally, let me thank our generous sponsors, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Stockman Bank, and Allegiance. Without our sponsors, we could not bring these shows to you. So if you want to know more about what we do, please have a look right over my shoulder. There's our website, www.montanaworldaffairs.org. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And every show that we produce, we put onto YouTube, this one included. So you can see the last 50 episodes of Connect Montana across a whole range of issues. So please join us there. Dr. Rashwan, one more time, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate having you.
I hope it wasn't very bleak. And I would just, maybe there is a still silver lining. And I would say Europe, a few decades from now, we're actually almost in the same shoe, and now they have freedom, and the same thing applies to the United States. So we hope that one day we'll be catching up.
Hear, hear. Absolutely. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Rashwan, and thank you to everybody who joined us. I wish you all a very good evening, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Norway showed a sudden increase.
The UN Truth Supervision